Hello everyone, it's Merlin here, and today we're going to begin our second segment of the month, and that's going to be every second week of the month. That is the second Wednesday of the month. I'm going to be discussing comic book stuff. Everything primarily based around American comics, generally mostly focused around superhero comics. Now, once again, like the movie discussions on the first Wednesday of the week, you guys can send in any requests for discussions you guys like me to talk about, reviews of newer comics or older storylines, general discussions about things, or individual character, thematic discussions, whatever. But to kick this off, I decided I wanted to kind of start off with something I actually kind of talked about a very long time ago back on, I think, one of my older channels, long before I was more established on YouTube. I did this random little video about the first graphic novel I ever purchased. I actually read it when I was about 16, and it was called Daredevil. And to this day, it's probably my favorite comic book storyline ever, and it's definitely my favorite Daredevil storyline ever. And I think it's mostly because of that comic and, well, a couple other ones that I actually really got into Daredevil. And one reason why he's actually one of my favorite characters is because I saw all the potential that that character had from that particular storyline. Guardian Devil was an 8-issue story arc that was published by Marvel Comics, beginning with the second volume of Daredevil, and basically Daredevil Volume 2, 1 through 8. So basically it kicked off the quote-unquote new version of the comic. Really, it was just a marketing ploy. It was still in the same chronology. Basically, it features Daredevil suddenly having to care for this infant who may or may not be the Messiah or possibly even the Antichrist. Now, the cool thing about this one was that it was actually written by Kevin Smith, who you guys might know as doing such movies as Clerks and Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back. And it was illustrated by Joe Quesada, who's essentially running Marvel Comics right now. You could actually find it in a graphic novel combining all 8 issues into one collection with an introduction by Ben Affleck, which is actually the one I had. It's gotten a little torn up now. Basically, it starts off after Matt Murdock's girlfriend Karen Page has basically left him, and of course Daredevil's kind of angry about this. And then this 15-year-old girl randomly comes out of everywhere, somehow knows his secret identity, and leaves her baby with him, claiming the baby was born without her ever having had sex. And he is eventually contacted by this mysterious man who's saying the child's the Antichrist. I'm not going to spoil everything, but his friend Foggy Nelson becomes accused of murder. He gets Black Widow to investigate this mysterious organization. Doctor Strange gets involved, Mephisto gets involved, and eventually his old enemy Bullseye gets involved, and it's really this massive conspiracy with a lot of different parties involved, and it's kind of this run against time. As Daredevil's really conflicted about what he's supposed to do with this child, there really seems to be this supernatural element that's bogging him down, and a lot of the personal things that happen to him along the way. I mean, I'd say it's a spoiler, but somebody does die. They kind of put it on the cover of the graphic novel, but I won't spoil it because I do want to encourage people to read it. This comic is honestly really well written. I think it's kind of funny that Kevin Smith typically does comedy in his films, but the superhero comics he's written, I guess because he's such a big fan of a lot of these storylines, they're usually really serious and really dark. And I mean, he knows complex characters, and he knows these characters in and out. Now, granted, I'm not going to lie, Kevin Smith is probably the reason I like Daredevil and the reason I like Green Arrow, because he also started the new line of Green Arrow comics in the early 2000s as well. I don't like his Batman comics as much, but he does write some pretty good stories. Generally, they're low on action, but there's a lot of plot, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue, and there's always a lot of complex themes, and the characters are very tortured and having to deal with a lot of intense issues. Now, this storyline has a lot of the awesome aspects of the superhero world. You've got Daredevil, you've got a couple other superheroes coming in, you've got mysterious cults, you've got crime lords, you've got possible supernatural demons and magic involved, and at the same time, it's a very grounded, dramatic story about faith and choices and family and relationships. There's a lot that goes on in this comic. It's really, really well done. I think one thing that also enhances it too, the writing is good, but the artwork is honestly fantastic. It's fairly realistic, but it's very, very detailed, and there's also some great coloring. Joe Quesada does some excellent artwork. I mean, I'm not sure about some of his editorial decisions, but he's an excellent artist. It's one of the most beautiful comics I've ever seen. I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, the amount of detail is just hard to beat. I think there are a few comics I think that have really surpassed it in terms of Joe Quesada's style, and you really see that here. Combined with Kevin Smith's writing, it's really good. Now, upon years of reflection, I don't know if this is necessarily the best comic book storyline I've ever read, but it's still pretty high up there for me. I mean, it's my personal favorite because for me it was kind of a stepping stone, because up to that point I had been reading some older comics and I had been learning about things and I had been getting comics from the library, and this is the first time I actually purchased a graphic novel for a character I didn't know a whole lot about, and it really, really got me into it. And I read it over and over again, and I just really became attached to this one. And it really got me into Daredevil. I started reading some of the comics that came after this, and I actually followed Daredevil very closely for years after that. Now, one of the most interesting things about this comic is the ending. There is a bit of a twist. This comic book storyline's fairly old, so it's kind of entered into almost legendary status now. It's a pretty significant Daredevil storyline. Some people didn't think so when it came out, did cause some controversy, but to be fair, that's kind of Kevin Smith's MO. But in a less comedic fashion this time. Though I honestly do think it's well done, the biggest piece of contention I've ever really heard from some people, really only one or two people, but the ending. Like I said, there is a bit of a twist about what's really going on, what the source of the evil is, what the mystery is, who's actually messing with Daredevil, what the purpose is behind this storyline, and who's causing all the mishaps and going after all the people that Daredevil cares about, ruining all this life and trying to drive him insane. You're thinking, okay, is it the Kingpin? Is it Mephisto? Is it the Hand? Is it an older villain we don't know about, or maybe a new one? And for me, one of the greatest aspects of the comic really is the twist, because in all honesty, it's something you really won't see coming. And it's kind of frustrating because I really don't want to spoil it. I really want you to read this comic and try not to spoil it for yourself. Who is actually responsible for it is kind of awesome. And some people might be thinking, some people might see that twist and what's actually going on and who's behind it and might say, wow, that's just something I wouldn't have expected. And maybe you're selling the villain short, maybe you're selling Daredevil short. Personally, I think it goes well because the way the particular character's arc concludes that's behind it, it actually kind of makes sense because they're pushing themselves to the limit. So I kind of can accept it. I mean, the whole final scene with the big reveal and the conversation between Daredevil and the villain and everything up to that point is probably one of the best exchanges of dialogue in comics between a hero and a villain. It's just so good. And you could argue maybe it is kind of a joke. Maybe you're looking at it the wrong way. This comic is supposed to be really serious and dark and tragic, but at the ending it's kind of like, wow, that's Kevin Smith. Is this some kind of joke? Did we just get punked? But I don't really think so. I think that it's legitimately trying to have some real impact. However, maybe Kevin Smith can't help himself because he kind of fits a villain in there that maybe doesn't make quite as much sense as it should. Maybe not, but in the context of that storyline, it still works fairly well. Really, that's the only thing about it I think some people have an issue with, and in all honesty, I think it works great. Really, Daredevil, Guardian Devil is honestly one of the best Daredevil story arcs I've ever read. It's one of my favorite comic book storylines in general. Great writing, great artwork, great introduction to Daredevil if you don't know much about him. There's a little bit of everything there. And really, it's just an excellent comic if you don't know too much about Daredevil. I'd really highly recommend it. It's really like in my top 5. So definitely check it out if you haven't read it. I encourage you not to look up anything about it if you don't have to, just because I don't want you to spoil yourself. If you read it, I want it to be a more natural experience and you kind of come to your own conclusions about what you feel about the twist. But overall, well done comic, very enjoyable. Definitely encourage you guys to read it. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Guardian Devil. So that's going to be the ending of the first episode of the second week segment. That's going to be Talking Comics. I'm going to be talking about comics the second Wednesday of each month from here on in. And it's going to be any relative topics about characters or storylines, whatever. So whether it's older stuff or newer stuff, you got anything to request for me to talk about, of course, always do. Check out the Phantom Group for anime discussions and various other things, and Film Fanatics Podcast for weekly movie reviews. All right, guys, if you haven't checked out my Monday live stream news video, check that out. I'll be doing another one next Monday night, and look forward to next week when I do my anime segment. All right, guys, it was fun. Check out Guardian Devil, and have a great night. Peace.